Okay. Okay, hello everybody. I'm unmuting everyone who's currently logged in. Charles, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So first off, I would like to apologize for the delay. Can everybody else should be unmuted? Would it be possible for you guys to just sound off and tell me that you can hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I can at least.
Yes, I can also.
Good. Okay, so let me apologize. There were problems with GoToWebinar, and we've been on a support call with them since 8:40. So I sincerely hope you accept my apology. Can you see me as well now? Yeah, you can see me and Mika.
At least I can.
Yeah. Can everybody else see me? Yep.
No, we can't hear you, Cormac.
Yeah, your voice just went. Cormac, we cannot hear you.
Mickey, you might have to make some hand gestures on the camera.
That wasn't good enough, I guess. So we cannot hear you.
I'm trying to call Cormac on his telephone now.
Okay. Yeah, I also sent him a chat, but I don't think he saw that.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. I don't know what's happening this morning.
Yeah,
The
this day started great.
Yeah, the ultimate demo effect.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna run that again. Okay, so yeah, welcome to our session this morning. We're going to talk about how to run your databases at the lowest total cost of ownership and add business value by migrating to the cloud. The agenda that we're going to cover today, a quick welcome and introduction session, and the presentation is going to switch between myself and Mika, depending on the section. We're going to kick off with why organizations modernize to Azure Cloud, adding value, innovations in the cloud, modernizing databases, what options to use and when, ground cloud, migrating databases to Azure, and then a tale of tailspin, modernization and of a fictional company to Azure. And then at the end of the session, a quick introduction to the hands-on lab and discussion. So quick introductions. My name is Cormac Walsh. I'm a cloud advisor at Nordcloud. My focus is on the use of data and the profitable use of data in organizations large and small. And now I'll pass over to Mika, and let's have a quick introduction from him.
Yes, so thank you. Name is Mika Sutinen, and I'm the database reliability engineering practice and team lead at Nordcloud. I have around 20 years of experience from Microsoft database stack, and for last 2 years or so, I've been working with Nordcloud, helping our customers to modernize their databases in the cloud. Thank you, Cormac.
Okay, excellent. So let's have a quick introduction then to Nordcloud, our company. So Nordcloud has a presence locally in 10 countries across Europe. We were founded, born in the cloud, as it says, in 2011, and we've grown to be a European leader in public cloud infrastructure solutions and cloud native applications and services, and in advisory and consulting in relation to the business impacts and benefits of cloud. By Gartner, we're ranked
Hey, we lost your audio again. Or can someone else hear Cormac at the moment?
No, we cannot.
No.
Yeah, okay. Let's see if I can get his attention.
I sent him a text message.
All right, thanks. Yeah, it's wonderful to be working online. Almost everything works all the time. Okay. Let's see. But I wonder, can he even hear us? I guess not, because
I think not, because he just carries on.
yeah. So there has to be something. Let's see if I can like mute and unmute him. But so
Okay. I think just calling his phone. I think I said, did we all see him look down at it?
yeah, yeah. Okay. I don't think he's seeing. He's not noticing the problem. Hello.
Oh yeah, he's just soldering on.
Yeah, and I have actually no way of like pinging him with anything in here.
Yeah, he hung up my call.
Okay.
I can't talk right now, so
Yeah.
I tried to sarcastically reply, but I guess he hasn't seen it. Can you take over presenting, Mika, maybe?
Okay, yeah, I can actually try that. Okay. All right, now I do it. Okay. Now he's checking his messages, I hope.
Yeah.
Okay, this is funny.
Mika.
Yes.
Okay, so can
Now
you?
I can hear you again because we couldn't hear you for the, I don't know, past 5 minutes. We tried to signal you, but.
Yeah, okay. I can hear you now. So please, if
Yeah,
you
I'm
could.
giving you back the presenter.
No, can you? I'm having problems here. Can you take over the presenting for a moment? Yeah, just go.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so you should be seeing a slide called Innovations to Consider that help deliver business value, hopefully.
Yep.
All right, so let's give Cormac a moment to figure out his technical issues, and I will actually jump a little bit ahead then. So one of the things we wanted to discuss is, of course, the technology benefits of going to the Azure. In the past 4 to 5 years, there's been like a mind-boggling number of new innovations, not just with the SQL Server, but the whole Azure data platform. And these are around topics such as performance, advanced security, compliance, analytics, and the BI. So some of these are available both on-premise deployments and also in Azure, but majority of these are built just for the Azure. And let's go through some of these innovations, starting with performance. So back in 2016, when Microsoft was starting to talk about that version of a SQL Server, they had this catchy marketing slogan that went, "It just runs faster." And it definitely did, because they had put in some considerable effort in the making SQL Server as one of the fastest relational database engines in the world. So they actually have done some benchmarking around that to give us numbers to prove it. And over the time, these technologies have been improved. Latest now in the Azure SQL and of course in the SQL Server 2019. Now some of these technologies are quite interesting. I have a few picked up here on this list. So we have in-memory technologies that enable these high throughput, low latency transaction processing scenarios. You can find these typically in gaming, online gaming industry or IoT devices. We have also column store, which can reduce your storage footprint up to 10 times compared to row-based databases. And when you have all these nice in-memory technologies, these actually enable you to run analytic queries against operational databases. So you get the operational analytics without the need to do heavy-duty ETL, and you can get those real-time insights directly from your operational databases while still having minimal performance impact on the OLTP workloads. On Azure side, we have intelligent insights. So you have something that will continuously monitor the database. And if it detects performance degradation, it actually will generate diagnostic logs that will help you to troubleshoot those issues. And if you want to have a bit more hands-off experience, like you usually want with past databases, you have an option to use automatic tuning. And there we have some rather interesting things like an automatic plan correction. So if you know how SQL Server works, it's that you typically get an execution plan that SQL Server thinks is the most optimal one. However, sometimes you generate a plan that's not so great, and SQL Server can actually now detect that. So if it sees that, hey, I have done this query much better in the history, it will just use the force the last good known plan. So it can automatically fix few of those performance degradation issues. And then we also have automatic index management, and this can create or drop indexes as it sees fit. And the beauty of this system is that it's actually not just creating things, it's also evaluating that how they help you. So if it sees that now we're actually the change I made isn't that great, it can also roll it back. Then moving to the security side. Also starting with 2016, we got the always encrypted, and this is something Microsoft implemented that in a single solution you will get the data at rest and data at motion encryption. So the first implementation was a bit restricted. You could only do very few operations on the data at the server side. And basically, I think the only thing you could do was do an equality comparison on an encrypted column. And that was only possible if you used the weaker type of encryption, which is called the deterministic encryption. However, with SQL Server 2019, and also when I say SQL Server 2019, I mean all the things we have in Azure SQL in Azure. We have the secure enclaves, and secure enclave is a combination of how you would call it, software and hardware features that provide you with an isolated execution environment inside your server. And this has actually taken away quite a few of those limitations we have before. So this is now a feature that is actually starting to be much more usable at this time. And then we have the Azure Advanced Data Security. This is a really nice feature or pack of features. So what we get there is a vulnerability assessment. And basically this is something that helps us to discover, track, remediate potential database vulnerabilities. And we also have the advanced threat protection, which is monitoring your database against any type of suspicious activities. And this is actually pretty great. It can detect things like possible SQL injections. So if you have suspicious looking queries, it actually can detect and alert you about those. And it can also detect if someone is accessing your data from an unusual location. So those are quite nice features there. Then moving on to compliance. Okay, so I think we are all familiar these days with 4 letters plus the GDPR. And of course, there are other regulations around personally identifiable information and other sensitive data. And thanks to these regulations, you're just not expected to have secured your data assets. But it also has bring this requirement to actually know that what type of data you have and where in your databases you are storing that. For that purpose, Microsoft has released something that's called the Data Discovery and Classification Tools. And that basically helps you accomplish that goal. So it helps you find, label, and classify data that falls under some of these regulations. We also have auditing, and that is something that's been in all of the SQL Server deployments for many years now, kind of standard for a lot of the commercial database engines. However, in Azure, that is also a bit enhanced. So if you are using the previously mentioned tools to classify and label your data, you will get much more information regarding the audit inside Azure logging or Azure SQL auditing. So there is actually going to be information in the logs that show you specific information about those classified data accesses. Then we have dynamic data masking. This is a lightweight solution, and by itself, it doesn't provide you that great data security. However, there are a few really interesting scenarios where I have seen this used. And one of these is typically a case where you have support staff that needs to access production systems. So in those cases, you can actually use this data masking feature to hide sensitive data from the people who don't actually have permissions to look at it. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to type them up on the chat or just interrupt me. I see we don't have that many attendees, so I think we can keep this more conversational in that sense. All right.
That sounds good. That sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, and then we are in the analytics and business innovation side. So we have another webinar starting later today, hopefully starting off a bit nicer than this one. And there we will do a bit more deeper dive into these topics. However, these are also relevant to database modernization. And I wanted to go through this also because the whole Azure data platform actually allows us to also modernize services that you might find that are usually attached to your on-premise database servers. So we have analysis services and reporting services and integration services. And all those can be hosted in cloud native solutions. Starting with Azure Synapse Analytics. So if you're not familiar with that, it's the evolution of the old Azure data warehouse. And it's kind of combining the capabilities of your enterprise data warehousing and the big data analytics. What that includes is things like you will have basically limitless scale. You can pause and resume those services. You have integrations for machine learning, streaming, analytics, and also Power BI. And like all the SQL Server products, they're designed for security. So you will find that you have column and row level security. You also have the dynamic data masking there. And I know that last I checked, the whole advanced data security was actually also in preview for the signups as well. And as we're talking about cloud native technologies, you also have things that you can do serverless. I think one of the things you could do was like explore the data lake using some of the tool. All right. So I'm coming up to the end of this section. Cormac, would you like to go back to the first one and try it again, or?
I'm still having some audio issues. I'm afraid that if I do go back to those slides, it's going to do the same thing. And
All right.
we lost the first nearly 40 minutes
Yeah.
due to technical issues, and like my section was 20 minutes. So
Yes. All right. Well, I will continue going then.
I think it's the best thing to do for now.
Yeah. Let's see if we can do your section at the end, maybe.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk about a little bit about the modernization options we have available in Azure. So what we can use and when we can use those. So Azure SQL, if you're not familiar with this title, it's not a surprise because it's something Microsoft announced only a few weeks back. And that's basically the unified product family for their whole SQL portfolio. And that's something that is supporting the full range of deployments going from the edge to the cloud. So you have everything on the between that fits now under this Azure SQL umbrella. Azure SQL flavors are SQL Server virtual machines. Then we have the managed instances, and then we have the Azure SQL database. All of these have their own role to play in this, and let's look at these a bit deeper. Starting with SQL Server and virtual machines. So I know some people still wonder why they should be running virtual machines in the first place, but there are quite a few good reasons I have found. And one is that sometimes you have such systems that you have to have complete control of your own database environment. So it's not just the database or the SQL Server instance. You also need to have control of the whole operating system. And only running SQL Server on virtual machine will allow that. Surprisingly to some, SQL Server VM is also the most flexible deployment option. And we have seen that there are some very specific kind of workloads that will actually benefit from having memory optimized environments. So if you think about PaaS, there's usually some sort of ratio of memory per vCore, so the CPUs you have. When you have SQL Server virtual machines, you actually get this memory optimized family of VMs where you can have really high ratio of memory, which is usually loved by the traditional relational database systems. Also in PaaS, if you have ever looked at specs, the compute side is not that fast. Typically, you will have 2.4, 2.5 gigahertz CPUs. If you're going with the compute optimized VMs, you will actually find that you can get closer to 4 gigahertz, sorry, not gigabytes, gigahertz processors. So there are actually some really fast VMs there. Also, I briefly touched this topic earlier. If you have SQL Server services that are outside the database, so reporting services, integration services, and if you're not ready to modernize those yet to something that's more cloud native, then basically your only option is to run SQL Server on virtual machine. Now, traditionally, the best way to deploy a SQL Server VM has been an Azure Marketplace image, because when you do it that way, you will by default get built-in security and manageability. So important and critical patches can be installed automatically for you. You will still need to manage cumulative updates and service pack yourself. Of course, you don't actually have service pack for the newer SQL servers these days, but the cumulative updates anyway. You will get automatic backups, and that is actually really nice. So if you don't have the in-house staff to manage your databases, if you're using Azure Backup, you will get automated backups up to 30 days of backup retention and possibility to manually configure how you want those backups to be run. You will also get connector to Azure Key Vault. And that's actually pretty nice because then you can use Azure Key Vault as an extensible key management provider. So you need that, for example, when you want to enable transparent data encryption. So you can actually get it that very nicely from from Azure. You have a quite nice flavor of operating systems. So if you're taking an Azure Marketplace VM image, you will get naturally the Windows server. You will have Red Hat Enterprise Linux servers. You will also get the Enterprise Linux server and Ubuntu Linux. And I guess that was actually the whole list. But there's also a possibility to bring your own self-installed VM images. And that's fine. And I think this was like last year, somewhere around autumn, that Microsoft made the SQL resource provider available for also these self-installed images. So now it's actually possible to get the marketplace benefits to your self-installed ones. And basically, all you need to do is to go and register your server with the SQL resource provider. And this is actually quite nice. I like to call it the PaaS Lite, because you will get those same benefits I mentioned earlier: automated backups and patching. It will also help you set up your availability groups. So if you're using that as a high availability option, and you should if you are doing modern SQL Server, it will actually automate part of that setup for you. It will also give you improved visibility for your whole SQL Server assets in the Azure. So there is a dashboard view that collects everything on the same pane of glass. And this also includes then your own images that previously were sort of easy to miss. And finally, and I think this is one of the better benefits because it touches the topic of licensing, which is, if you have ever worked with SQL Server licensing, it can be a pain. So when you register with the SQL resource provider, you actually get what's called licensing and edition flexibility for your VMs. And this allows quite a few things. So first of all, you can convert your images to pay-as-you-go images. You will get the licensing benefit of having free disaster recovery replicas in Azure. So it also enables the hybrid benefit, which basically means that you can now use your own licenses to run your SQL Server and Azure. And the best part about this is that you don't actually need to request anything from Microsoft. It will just work for you. And even better, you can also change your edition information through Azure Portal. So you can go from standard edition to enterprise edition and backwards. So you can change that edition information there. If you are running your own VMs already in Azure, I would strongly suggest that you go and check this out. It's pretty awesome. So next we have the managed instances. And this is the latest addition to the Azure SQL. So it's something that's in the middle of having your VM and all the responsibility, or having just a database and not that many responsibilities at all. The reason I see managed instance. By the way, did I change the slide? It says so, but I don't think my screen is updating properly.
No, I don't think this changed.
So you're not seeing managed instance.
Managed instance. Okay. Yes.
No.
Now.
Okay.
Yeah.
funnily, because it changed on one screen and in the other it doesn't. I'm starting to dislike GoToWebinar, by the way. Okay, getting back to this. So we actually have a managed instance that is between VMs and databases, and this is mostly for compatibility reasons. So sometimes you need features that are only available in VMs, but you don't really want to manage the whole infrastructure, and that is the case you have for the managed instances. It provides almost 100% feature parity compared to VM. I haven't checked the list of features that are not supported yet. I did a long time ago, and when I did, actually those features seemed such that you shouldn't be using them in the first place. So, so you're most likely good off with managed instance. It also supports database compatibility levels down to SQL Server 2018. This is actually good because the compatibility level is one of those tools that you can use in database modernization. And what that allows is that it allows you to use the latest version of a SQL Server engine, but you can still maintain the database functionality of the previous versions. So if you are going, for example, from 2008 to 2016, you can keep the database compatibility level at that lower level. And how it works is that for that specific database, the queries will behave just as they would in a similar hardware configurations running on that older version of a SQL Server engine. Naturally, your goal should be, of course, to go to the latest version of the compatibility level that is the highest, because that also upgrades the database so that it can use the latest benefits and performance improvements you have available. Managed instance is also evergreen, so you don't need to manage the patching or the hardware upgrades. You will always have latest versions and the latest infra underneath that. So it's also optimized for DBA productivity. And what that specifically means is that your in-house staff, if you have that, they are able to do other things than watch after your backups and things like that. So previously, if you have been managing databases, you know that there's quite a lot of toil involved. And that's something you can define as endlessly repetitive tasks that nobody usually appreciates until you hit the disaster. And then if you haven't been doing it, then you are facing something that we call as a CV generating event. So being a DBA is usually something that's stressful and underappreciated. And that's why pretty much all of them who have turned 30 will look like me, slightly gray. When you have a PaaS database, like managed instance, you can give them back their time. They can use a better way. And this is important because there's a secret ingredient that will make all the PaaS databases run faster. And it's money, basically. If you go to Azure portal, there's a thing called, I don't know what's it called, I call it the money slider. If you move it to the right, you will get faster database. But it's costing you almost always the double of what it cost before. And what I have seen is that when you start with the project on Azure DB or managed instance, it will run fine. And then you start having more data, you start having more users, and it starts to slow down. And you can work around it by throwing money at it, which is one way that I usually don't recommend you to do. Or you can let your database experts to work on those issues. So basically, if you have the in-house DBAs, they don't need to do backups and all the other, I would say, boring things. They can start fine-tuning your databases, making it faster. And the great thing about the money slider is that it also moves to the left. So if you have really skilled people working for you, they can start saving you money because they will be optimizing those databases so that you will actually need less resources to run them. And that's also a bit more rewarding for the database people because they don't need to be worrying about the basic needs. They can focus on something that's actually bringing value to your businesses. And I can tell you from the experience that it's quite great when you do some small changes and you have processes that have been running for minutes and suddenly they run in less than a second. Not too long ago, I was working with a customer who had a managed instance. I think I added like 5 indexes, and that kind of small work dropped the overall workload of that environment by 30%. So that's kind of nice way to show the business value of having database skills. And that's why I think all DBAs should love using these fast databases. Okay, moving on. Azure SQL database. So fun bit about this is that it's actually one of the oldest Azure services. So the first release, I think remember correctly, it was 2010. So it's almost as old as the Azure itself. So before you could actually run a SQL Server VM in Azure, which seems sort of easier to accomplish, you could have an Azure SQL database there. Of course, the database back then was quite different. I think the first version had some nice funny limits, like 2 gigabytes of database size was the maximum or something like that. So we have come quite a way in 10 years. These days, you don't have just the database standard tiers, you have things like serverless and hyperscale. And these are quite interesting. So if you have the serverless compute tier, that's basically something that will automatically scale its compute based on your workload. And if you have inactive periods, let's say during the night, if we are talking about development or test environments, it can automatically pause for those periods of time. You can, of course, control the amount of scaling it does, as well as when it does the auto pauses. This is also kind of a price performance optimized option. So when you have a serverless, the compute is built by the second. Like I said, this is very good for development or testing scenarios. So where you have this kind of an intermittent usage and it's kind of unpredictable. And you're not so worried about having some delays because after the database pauses, before it gets up and running again, there's going to be short delay. But if you have applications that can actually allow it, this kind of a short warm-up time, then this is an ideal solution. And then we have the hyperscale, which is completely the other end of the spectrum, I would say. So this goes beyond general purpose and business critical service tiers limitations. It will support up to 100 terabyte of database size. And the funny thing is that it can still do almost instant backups. So what you have actually in there is not the usual SQL Server backup, but it's based on an Azure Blob Storage file snapshots. So you can get almost instant backup and it has absolutely no IO impact on your workload. As a side product or benefit, you will also have restores that will happen in minutes. If you have ever restored multi-terabyte database in a regular SQL Server VM or anywhere else, that will always take a huge amount of time. with hyperscale tier in Azure SQL database, we're talking about minutes. Another nice thing about it is that the actual architecture itself is now distributed. And this is something that actually allows you to move beyond some of the, I would say, typical restrictions you will often see in cloud databases. So for example, compared to traditional database engines, where you have all functions basically centralized inside the same process, with hyperscale, you actually have different components. So you have a query processing engine, and then you have things like the compute and storage and logging, and these are all sort of working separately from each other. And this allows you to scale them, of course, separately, but also go beyond those limitations you see in standard database bases in the cloud. Okay, then a little bit about the built-in features. Microsoft talks about the built-in artificial intelligence. And what that really means is that SQL Server is able to learn from your queries. And not just from your queries, but it's actually something they're doing that's called horizontal learning. So they're using queries coming from millions of other databases that are hosted in Azure. And they're using those and that built-in intelligence to learn and to find new optimization opportunities for your databases. I already mentioned the automatic tuning and the automatic tuning before, and this is part of that. So when they find things to improve, those changes will be done during a low usage periods of your environments. And then it does the verification that did it provide the impact they were expecting. And if those changes do not realize the expected improvements, then those are reverted. I think I forgot to mention that automatic tuning is also partially available for on-premise or the SQL Server running on a VM, but that's only the plan forcing part. So the mechanism that does the new indexes and drops unused indexes, that's only available if you are using an Azure SQL database. There's also built-in high availability. Microsoft is promising 99.99% uptime, and that's the minimum availability, by the way. Azure SQL database is also at the moment the only SQL PaaS offering that guarantees recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives. So no one else is doing this at the moment. And then there is layers of security. So looking at a little bit the model Microsoft has, the security model that's based on layers. So you have intelligent adaptive security, the access management, and the data protection. And Microsoft is spending quite an effort on the security side. So you can say that this is true and tested. I was checking some statistics from their security center, and there was mentioned that they're actually collecting 6.5 trillion security signals daily. And these are coming from their own services like the Azure, Xbox, Office 365, and they also have a partner ecosystem where they get this data. So when it comes to security, the whole advanced data security Microsoft has built, it's actually based from their experience on monitoring over 1 million databases for more than past few years. So that's what I would really agree is true and tested in that sense. All right. So here are the options we had. SQL Server virtual machines. If you have resources to run that, that's really good. It also the most flexible. It can host host up to 64 terabytes of databases. There's basically very few limits there. Then if you have managed instances, that's the nice middle way. There are some limitations, so you don't get access to a lot of the configuration things. Also, at the moment we're talking, it's an 8 terabyte limit for databases. So I have actually seen quite a few data estates that simply hit that limit already. It's still very interesting target for migrations because you can run most of your code there without any changes or just with some minimal changes. And then we have the SQL database, which is, I think that's usually something that I would maybe recommend when you're doing this kind of a new development or you're completely re-architecting a database. Okay.
Mika, could I just ask that?
Yes.
Does the audience have any questions so far?
Okay. I guess no questions at that time.
Okay.
So one thing, I'm not sure if this actually is a quite up-to-date slide. Cormac, you have been talking to a lot of our customers. Do they actually have their own data centers these days?
Well, yeah, there are like customers I've been dealing with in banking and in the airline industries. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So there are still, because I think those are the industries that I have not missed. Most of the customers I deal with, they usually have their data centers hosted by some third party.
But let me add to that point that while they would have data centers there, they would be in a hybrid model, so they would not be hosting everything themselves. And additionally, of course, because I know them in depth, it means that they are migrating.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. That's actually a bit of a new information for me.
Yeah.
So in case you are one of these customers that have your own data center, well, of course, if you are moving to Azure, that means that you don't actually need to worry about your own data center anymore. So you don't need to worry about the management of that, the staffing of it. And when you go with Azure, I think you can quite safely assume that you are getting quite modern data center services. I haven't been able to visit any of those, but I have spoken with people who have been working on Azure data centers, and they sound quite impressive in that sense. So if you're moving to infrastructure as a service, you will get some nice benefit out of it already. Of course, that means that you still need to worry about few things that you will be doing yourself, which on this picture are the things starting from the operating system and upwards. Then we have the platform as a service option. And this is one of those things, like I mentioned, I see that a lot of customers I have been working with, they already have a third-party hosting partner. So they're actually having PaaS from a private cloud. And sometimes there's a discussion that why you want to actually move from private cloud PaaS to Azure. And that's a really good point, and I want to actually go a little bit into that. So when I talk about SQL Server, there's a lot of claims made by other companies that they're sometimes the largest hoster of SQL Server in a public cloud business. And that could be true. I don't know if it's true. I don't know the numbers. But the one thing I usually say is that they are a hoster. So whoever is it, Google, Amazon, Alibaba, when they are providing you a SQL Server platform service, it's still just going to be a SQL Server that has some levels of abstraction on top of it. And that's the only thing they can do. Only Microsoft is able to build their SQL Server offering in a way that they can implement it as a backbone of their cloud. So if you're looking at the things they have done and what we have already looked at, we have those automated performance management systems and the threat detection and the risk management and all that. That is something that only Microsoft can do because it's their product. And of course, if I need support with SQL Server, I would always try to go with the people who have actually been designing and building those software components. And that I think is one of the bigger differentiators when I'm thinking about hosting SQL Server on a public cloud. And that's why I would always recommend Azure for it. And yeah, you will still also get some quite nice benefits from the fact that that PaaS environment, someone is still managing those underlying components. And then I would prefer also that it's done by the company that's building the products. Okay, so up until now, we have been talking mostly about SQL Server, but Azure is actually a bit more. And here we have an Azure data platform. How Microsoft defines that is that it's this kind of a common foundational layer that is in the form of Azure that supports your whatever DB engine of choice. If you have open source, relational or non-relational databases, there is always going to be a solution for you in Azure. And it's not just the databases. As we were talking before, that if you have, or if you already have a larger SQL Server data estate on premises, you're probably using it for more than databases. So we can see that you will always have there things like integration services because data needs to be moved around. Sometimes you have the reporting services because people need the insights from that data. SQL Server is actually quite capable platform on its own because you will get all of those. You have the data warehousing capabilities. It can even do master data and data quality services on top of everything else it does. And when you start modernizing to PaaS, you need to find some way also to modernize all of these services built around it. One way is to go with the VMs, but for example, if you want to run your integration services packages in a cloud native service, you will have Azure Data Factory. If you're running analysis services now on premises, there's the Azure Analysis services that will help you. If you're doing reporting, there's a Power BI, which of course requires a bit work to get your reports there, but still you will always have options built into Azure. And we also have quite nice support for open source databases. I've been talking somewhat with Microsoft about this, and they actually have built really nice ecosystem around the open source databases. One thing that's really nice is that they're using the same databases that are actually released by the community. So if you have other public cloud providers, they sometimes do their own versions of MySQL. And it's not the absolutely same, than you would get if you are using the community version. Microsoft has taken another approach here, and they're actually using the community versions, which means that if you have ever had this phrase thrown at you that are called vendor lock, then you don't actually get that. You are always free to take your data from Azure and host it on your own open source databases. Microsoft also does few things that no one else does on the open source databases. One of them is actually linked on the bottom of that page. It's called Hyperscale as a Postgres SQL database. About a year ago, Microsoft bought this company called Citus Data, and when they did that, they acquired this technology that allows them to deploy horizontally scaled out Postgres environments. That was actually quite interesting because from what I remember, it allows you to scale out to hundreds of nodes, I think it was. So that's kind of pretty interesting offering for Postgres, and I haven't actually seen that done by anyone else at this time. And then we have Azure Cosmos DB. So this is something that actually comes up quite often these days. This is a Microsoft product that, well, it works with non-relational databases, first of all. It has APIs for most of the popular options. So you get support for MongoDB, Cassandra, HatePage, Couchbase, and maybe a few others. I don't remember the list, is that updated, but might be. Cosmos is globally distributed database. So you will always have your data where your services are. It's also quite fast. So Microsoft is saying that it will provide you with a single digit millisecond latencies. 99.999% of high availability. Basically, this is a product that they are usually marketing towards this kind of systems that need to be massively scalable and globally distributed. So good for e-commerce, IoT, and gaming, I would say. Okay. So any questions about this Azure SQL or Azure Data Platform? I guess not.
Yeah, doesn't seem to be any questions so far. So I think you just continue. That'd be great.
Yep. Or how about, I think we originally had planned to have a short break around this time. Do you think we should continue moving forward, or?
I think we'll continue given the time that was lost. Unless would the audience like to have a quick break now?
All right, I guess we continue then on a little bit faster pace. All right. So now that you know what options are available, I think it's a good time to look at the processes and tools that you can follow when you are migrating your database workloads to Azure. So first of all, sorry. So Microsoft has a quite nice guidance around Azure migrations. They provide instruction on how to do the SQL Server databases, how to do open source databases, and so on. There's even instructions on how you move those platform services to Azure, or how you actually can migrate your data warehouse appliances if you happen to have any of those. In the Microsoft migration guide, there's also quite a nice amount of case studies. So if you have time, please go and check out those. There might be something that could fit already your needs and someone else has done it. So it's a quite good way to get some insight on how that went with them. On the migration guide Microsoft provides, there is also so list of partners that you can contact, partners like us at the Nordcloud, to get assistance on the migrations. So one thing I would like to mention, it's a bit outside the scope of this webinar, but the reason I think you should contact us, for example, is that we won't just help you move your database workloads to the cloud. We help you to get it start going in a good way from the start. So if you don't have already proper landing zones defined, and you don't have those governance models already thought about, you should definitely pay some attention to this before you are moving your workloads in the cloud, because it's a bit more difficult to start fixing that after you already migrated your first set of services. So naturally, Microsoft does provide some help on this as well. So they have the cloud adaptation framework, but that's a huge collection of information, documentation, implementation, guidance, best practices, and tools. I think it was like 1,000 pages. So if you don't really feel like reading through all of that, go and check out the guidance Microsoft has, and then also contact some partners, preferably us, of course. All right. When it comes to migrations, Microsoft does have a whole bunch of nice tools here. So coming directly from Microsoft, you have Data Migration Assistant, you have Data Migration Service. This is actually really cool. I'm going to show a demo about it in a few minutes. And what that actually allows you to do is that it allows you to migrate massive amounts of databases while still getting almost downtime almost down to zero. It also supports both online and offline migrations. From Microsoft, you will also get the database experimentation assistant. This is actually a really nice tool as well. What it does really is that it takes recording of transactions happening in your database, and it allows you to run those queries against a copy of your database elsewhere. So if you are thinking about migrating to something, well, let's say you're going from one version to a newer version, or from traditional SQL Server VM database to an Azure SQL database, you can use this to test how that workload behaves before you actually do the migration. With DMS, you also get some free goodies. So I think up to 6 months you can get for vCore for your VM service. So that's quite nice way. You can also start testing out with that one. Then you have traditional tools that have been in SQL Server for quite a while. So you have the SQL Server Migration Assistant. From the third-party toolings, there's also a few worth mentioning. So for the migrations, you will get Mover, Cloudbase, Turbonomic. Unify Cloud has some products. Microsoft used to have licenses for Attunity Replicate. Actually, I'm not sure about that because I just realized that it was acquired some time ago by Click. So they now own the product. I'm not sure if you can still use that with Azure migrations, but that used to be one of the better options. Basically, that allowed or covered some scenarios that the data migration service still couldn't do back then. But then there's also the gray truck option. So that's referring to the data box. And that is when you really need to move something massive to Azure. I haven't had the opportunity to use that. Earlier this year, we actually had one migration case where we were migrating closer to 20 terabytes to Azure. And that was quite critical. So we only had a weekend to do it. And one of the backup options we had in case something went wrong, that we'd use the data box. And Microsoft actually shipped that device already to the data center. However, we didn't have any problems migrating in time, so we never had to use it, but it would have been quite cool option to use, I think. All right, and before we move to demos, I would like to still go through this kind of a typical migration process we have. So what we have here is the assessment part. And this is usually where you create your cloud migration plan. So what happens here is that you evaluate and sometimes discover applications. And basically you can use existing change management databases, some data collectors that allow you to create this kind of an inventory. This is actually also a great place to do some housekeeping. Last year, we helped one of our customers who had a large on-premise database hotel. They had nearly 2,000 databases there, and they weren't sure that what of them are still used. So we helped them set up a process that let them get some information about how those databases were used. And it turns out that there were, I think it was a little over 300 databases that were not used at all. However, they were still paying for the data center to actually host those, take backups, perform the usual maintenance. So that's actually quite nice story about how you can get some cost benefit out of database modernization even before you start moving anything. You can figure out that, okay, we have a whole bunch of things that we're not even using at this point. And this can be quite common if you have large data estate that you have been building for years. So usually there's not so much database lifecycle management processes around. And this is of course something that when you are moving to Azure, you can then fix. Also in this planning phase, you usually start calculating the total cost of ownerships to get those potential cost savings. And it's some process that where we also start involving the stakeholders for each application. As we move to migrate, so depending on what kind of plan we have, we'll be doing rehosting, or sometimes called the lift and shift. Sometimes we refactor things, small changes to applications, maybe to database. It can also end up in re-architecting. So that's the kind of option where you start looking at all the Azure capabilities you have. And then you start thinking that how you take your application apart and start using these cloud native options. And of course, then there's always the option of rebuilding everything completely. But that's quite rare, at least in my opinion. So and then as we have done this migration, we start to optimize. So it's optimizing both performance, right sizing your VMs and your services, but it's also about optimizing your costs. So you start to trimming and fine tuning your environments to make it as cost efficient as possible. And finally, there's secure and manage. So this is the part where you start using full extent of the Azure services to protect your data. So we have already discussed a little bit about the Azure data security, advanced data security. And you also start setting up monitoring. So you are monitoring your applications, you're monitoring your infrastructure using either cloud native tools or something else. All right. And then we're actually up for a demo. So let me get started here. So what we'll be showing, or I will be showing, is few tools. So I will show you how to use the data migration assistant. Then I will show you a little bit about Azure Migrate. And finally, we will move some data around with data migration service. You are seeing my VM, hopefully.
Yeah, we can see it now.
All right.
You see the demo
great.
screen.
All right. So for the purpose of this demo, I have built a small environment for us. We have a virtual machine that's pretending to be our on-premise database server. Then we have a database, a single SQL database in this case, and this is going to be the target for our data migration. We also have Azure Migrate. So what Azure Migrate is that it's a centralized hub that collects information about your migrations and assessments. And then we finally have the database migration service that will migrate the data. So let's look at the data migration assistant first. So this is one of the Microsoft tools they have built that can actually assess your databases, but it can also migrate it depending of what you are using it for. Let's actually see that everything is. Yep, so we have. So in the on-premise environment, we don't really have that massive environment. We have few databases we can use. Some sample databases from Microsoft, Stack Overflow database dump that they generally share. It's actually quite fun, quite good if you ever want to test some database things. Get the Stack Overflow dump and use that. And then we have our Azure environment with the target database. And at the moment, this database is quite empty. So we don't have anything there. The first step we want to do is to start, of course, the assessment. This tool is quite nice to use. It's possible to run this also from a command line. This is especially something you want to consider if you have dozens of servers, hundreds of databases. Then you don't probably want to be doing it using using the UI. You want to script that out and run it that way. So let's see. There are a few options here. So you can do the assessment or you can do the migration. This time I will do the assessment first, so we get to know that what kind of databases we have. Do we have any problems with migrating these? There are a few options here. You can assess the database engine, but also if you have integration services. So this can actually check your packages and see if you can run those against Azure databases. As for the server type, the source server, this is you have two options here. You have AVS RDS or you have a SQL server, which typically is the VM. For target, you get all these options. Let's put it against Azure SQL database because that's what we would be wanting to do. And then you just create. Right. So here are a couple options. You can check database compatibility and you can check feature parity. So what this does is that it will not only check your database, but it will check your instance level as well to see if you have some features there that you need to re-engineer for some other purpose. The next, you get to select your source target, source server. In this case, the webinar VM1. Let's say connect. And here you can select databases you want to access. So one interesting thing, this is actually a bit newer addition. At the bottom of this, there is a place to point to a folder. And what this means is that you have an ability to use either extended events or a SQL profile trace to record your database use. So if you have that kind of case that you are using your database mostly as a data storage, and you have plenty of ad hoc queries built inside your applications, you can record that as an extended event or trace file, store it somewhere where you can access it, and then also run assessment against those queries. And what that basically does is that it checks that if you are using some features that are not actually supported in Azure SQL database or some other PaaS option. It can actually also show you a few other things. So I've wrote some bad queries here. You should be able to see those pop up in a moment. Also here is possibility to add another file. So if you own the application source code and you actually can get to it, if you have Visual Studio Code, there's an extension that allows you to run query assessment against your application. And you can then take that assessment out of the application, store it as a JSON file, and just add it here. So if you would have a JSON file with the assessment information, you could just pick it and have it added to the same assessment. And that's pretty much it. The next thing you will do is to click Start Assessment, and it'll run. Depending on your environment, this usually takes a few minutes. It can also, if you have a lot of databases, it can be a bit intensive operation. So the recommendation is to run this during a bit more quiet time in the evenings or during the night. What we're already seeing here is that you will actually get 2 pages, so to speak. You get the feature parity one that tells you that are you using, for example, features that are not supported in Azure SQL database. In here we have few. So we are using some trace flags in a SQL Server. We get those 2. These are something, of course, you don't really need to worry about when you are running Azure SQL database. Then you also have Azure SQL Server agent jobs. In this case, we have few example jobs, one that does database maintenance. Again, this isn't something you would worry about in Azure, but we also have an ETL job. And this is, of course, something you would need to worry about. So if you are running ETL inside the SQL Server agent, if you're moving to Azure SQL database, you don't have the agent, you need to find some other way to do it. This tool is actually quite nice because it tells you that there are few ways to get also around these problems. In this case, it's proposing that we could maybe write this job as an Elastic database job in Azure. Then it also detects that you have reporting services installed, which is not supported. As a recommendation, it tells you that you should install reporting services on Azure Virtual Machine. Okay, and now I see that our compatibility issues have also been finished, so let's move on to these. So this is quite similar. So what we are seeing here is all the databases we assessed. And we can definitely already see that, okay, for report server, we have some migration blockers. And when it comes to migration blockers, these are the real problems. So everything else is something that you probably can work around. But if you have a migration blocker, that means that this database will not run on Azure SQL database without some considerable refactoring. You also find that we have behavior changes. These are not migration blockers. They are, however, something that you need to verify that what is the changed behavior. It could be that your query will start working in a different manner once you move it. We also have deprecated features. I think all my example databases are so new that they don't have any. A deprecated feature originally meant that it's something that Microsoft would remove from a future version of SQL Server. However, these days it's not. So they're not actually removing any features anymore. They will, however, not be maintained. So if there is a bug in a deprecated feature, you won't get it fixed, but it's still going to be there working as it has been before. And then you have some information issues like deprecated data types, which are being used. For these, it's the same. I haven't seen Microsoft remove any for multiple versions, even though it does say it will be discontinued. But that's not really what it means. So for the Stack Overflow, let's check this, because here we actually had something that I created myself. So this is actually coming now from that query assessment. So I wrote some queries. One of them was old style join. And this is actually pretty nice, because for these kind of simple things, this tool can actually tell you that how you should be fixing it. So rather than writing it like that, it's telling me that you should be using the proper inner join clause to make it more qualified. On top of this screen, you will also, so these are quite small databases. I don't have a lot of problems, but this also says a list of different compatibility levels. So if you would have a bit older database, you would usually see some sort of different number here, that the older the database is, the less compatibility issues you have. In this case, we only have one, and that one behavior is so bad that it has been behavior change ever since 2008. So that's the thing. So before the next step, let's go to the back to the Azure portal. So I've also mentioned that we have the Azure Migrate, and after you have done the assessment, it is possible to run or upload these results to Azure Migrate. To do that, however, we first need to create something. So Azure Migrate, as I mentioned, is a central hub you can sort of use to track your migration process. You notice that you have multiple migration calls. You have servers, databases, whatever web apps, and so on. We only have databases at this point. So let's actually see if we have a project. No, we don't. So let's create a new one. Demo project. Create it. So this is how you create a new project, quite easy. Click next. And then it asks you a few questions. You could skip these for now. However, I already know that I want to use the database assessment tool, so I can just select it from here. Your other option would be to use the Unified Cloud's Cloud Pilot. This is actually a pretty cool tool, but for that you actually need to pay some licenses for. Then you click next. Same for the migration tooling. So I already have set up data migration service, so I'm just going to skip that one. And finally, you have the review part. So basically what we're acting is the database assessment now. And then we click that one. This usually is quite fast to deploy. All right, there it is. Now that we have created this project, we can upload our data. Here, few selections. Select Azure if you are not from China, Germany, or US government. It's then going to load up your subscriptions. Yeah, I'm going to use mine. Okay, and it's all right. Yeah, when you have a lot of things in Azure, you sometimes get nice messages out of it, but don't worry about that. So we have our subscriptions, we have our Azure Migrate project, and that's all you need to do. Then you hit upload. And considering that we had quite small assessment, this doesn't really take that much of a time. So let's come back here. It sometimes says that it can take a few minutes to get this done, but let's see. Yeah, it's ready already. So this is actually a really nice feature. When you have hundreds of databases, the ability to monitor where you're going with this is absolutely important. Here we can see that in our assessment, we have assessed one database instance. We see that we have assessed 5 databases. 3 of them are ready for Azure SQL database, and 5 are ready for Azure SQL VMs. You can also drill further from here. So you will get some basic idea about the readiness status, in our case 60%. And if you click further, you will actually get the list of databases and what kind of breaking changes or migration blockers you might have, and the readiness for different systems. Unfortunately, you cannot click further from here. It would be really nice if it would actually throw that same report in Azure portal that you get from the client. But the only way you can get to the details is by having saved that assessment and then going back to it. This is actually something we have requested from Microsoft quite a few times, that why they simply cannot have that same functionality inside this portal. All right. So we can see that database Stack Overflow 2010 is one thing we could migrate rather easily to Azure SQL database. So actually, let's do that. For that purpose, I'm actually going to show you a couple of ways that you could do it. So let's actually go back to the assessment tool. As you saw, there was ability to do this migration. So let's actually do it. This one. No. And what we are wanting to do here, actually, yeah, let's do it in 2 parts. So you can select multiple ways to do it, and depending on the tools you want to use. So you can take schema and data. You can also use the data migration service to migrate the schema first and then data. But in this case, let's see how these both work. So let's only take the schema from here. And let's connect. And I also only want that one, and I don't want to do any assessments. I've already done it. And let's say, or actually, let's put that back. And then we have to connect to the other service. And actually now I need to do a little bit digging around here. To get the passwords right. And it already shows us that we have one database available that we could use. So we are going to be using that one. And as we move forward, and here is the list of tables we have and stored procedure. So these are the schema objects that it's going to be migrating to Azure. And after that, you click generate script. And this is what you'll get out of it. So here we have a schema we'll be deploying. And you just click the button and it's done. So now when we go to our database, let's say refresh. Yeah, so tables now exist in Azure already. However, we shouldn't be able to see anything here yet. Yeah, it's empty. All right, but now we are actually in the kind of situation that we can start the migration itself. So let's go to the migration service. Okay, migration service is quite simple to use in my opinion. How we start is that we start new migration project first and migrate data. You can select server types. So in here you can actually see a bit more stuff that is supported. So data migration service supports migrations from Mongo, MySQL, and so on. We are working with SQL Server. Target server type for us is Azure SQL Database. You can also select what kind of migration you want to be doing. So here we have the first option. This is the most basic one. So this is that thing where you put your database into a read-only mode and you just move the data. We have ability to do the schema-only migration, which is something we just did using the data migration assistant. Then we have the online data migration. This is actually quite nice. So let's actually look at that. So what this does is that if you have a large database that you need to keep available 24/7, but you still need to migrate it, you can use the online data migration. And what that pretty much does is that it's replicating all the changes that are happening in the source system to the target. There are a few cases. So if you have tables that don't have primary keys, you need to actually enable change data capture there. You need to have the distributor role configured for the source database and so on. And there are a few other limitations. So it's actually requiring you to take full backups as well. For the sake of simplicity, we'll be doing an offline data migration. And then we just save that. All right. And then all you need to do is to create and run the activity. So here, okay, we are selecting the source environment. So it's going to be this one. And we can use that. So I actually set up a lot of this stuff beforehand because this can actually take quite a long time to deploy. I didn't want to spend time on that. And seeing how things have been going, it's actually a good idea that I did. Yeah, I will probably knock on wood because I don't want to jinx my demo. And then let's go back here. And
that demo effect again.
yeah, I guess that at that point we could just stop and go home again.
But it is going very smoothly, Mika.
Yeah,
well done. Thank you.
Surprisingly smoothly considering how it started out. Okay, so for the target environment, this is actually set up on the logical server level. So I'm not saying that move to this database, I'm putting here the actual logical server name. Even if you have an Azure SQL database and you don't need to worry about those instance level things, you will still need to have a container for your databases, and that's basically the logical SQL server in Azure. And then you hit save. All right, and here we can see that the databases we have available, and we wanted to migrate that one, and we just select the I'm actually thinking that maybe I have a, yeah. So I just realized that I did such a small server that this is too big database. Let's change to another one. Oh, but we cannot. Okay. Let's go back here. Check the database size. Oh, it's actually 10 gigabytes. It will fit there. Okay, cool. So the target database, and here we actually have an option to set the database read only. So when we click that and hit save, okay, and here we are seeing what will happen. So we are going to now migrate these tables to our SQL database. We hit save and run migration. After we give it a name, let's use that same one. So hey, one thing to mention here, I have a considerably small database, mostly because it's running on my free tier subscription, and I don't have a lot of credits there. If you are doing this kind of a migration and you want it to run fast, you can temporarily change the size of that database to something much bigger. It will take quite a lot of time out of the migration effort. This will probably run so long that I'm not even going to watch it all through the end. But however, I wanted to show this demo that what it looks like. So during the migration, if you are using DTU model or VCO model, just upgrade to as high as you can to make it fast. And then you hit the migration. So one thing you also get with this, which is really nice, is that you have a dashboard where you can monitor the progress. So here we are seeing that we are now starting with the tables. Let's see if, okay. And you can actually go here to get a bit more information about it. So you can see that we have already moved 100 million rows or something like that from one table. This doesn't really refresh all that nicely by itself, but if you click here, you can see that the number of rows is slowly growing and growing. So this is the kind of method you can use to monitor the progress of your migration inside the data migration service. And of course, if you have an online migration, you will get bit more visibility on here that how far behind you are on the replicating of the new data. All right. So that goes. So that's a large database, small database on the Azure side. So we're not going to wait until it finishes. I guess it will actually take several hours. But I just wanted you to see that how it's going. And actually, I wonder if we can already select something from here. Not yet. So it will take quite a lot of time for that to complete. But basically, that finishes up the demo, and we didn't even have anything catch on fire. So I think I will now stop doing the demo because I said that. Any questions around this? Okay, I guess not.
Should we take a quick break, Mika?
Yeah, let's take a 10-minute break now and come back then.
Okay.
Okay.
So
yeah,
let's pause for 10 minutes and come back at 11:20.
yes, let's do that.
Hello. I can't hear you. Are you on mute? I can
I'm
hear
off
you now.
mute now. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Mika, can you speak? Mika seems to be having audio problems.
How about now?
I hear you now.
Okay, so for some reason my mic went crazy. Okay, so that finishes up the demo portion of the talk, and I think we can go back to discussing the final part, so to speak. And
I'm gonna risk it and try and use my webcam. Make sure it doesn't crash the webinar again.
Okay. All right. So final bit, modernizing the Tailspin Toys. So Tailspin Toys is actually a fictional company created by Microsoft. I think they actually have quite some interesting experiments around that. But we're using it as well as a sort of how to say mental exercise, that how we would approach this kind of a modernization project. And let's set the stage first. So we have a company, it's an online gaming company, and it's because of whatever reasons, such as maybe the global pandemic, experiencing an exponential growth in the number of their users. And this has also caused them now to be struggling in database performance. So basically they don't have this kind of ability to scale it, and they don't have a lot of database expertise to start tuning that system on the on-premises. They're also probably experiencing some availability issues because of the increased load, and they are looking now to migrate their whole gaming setup to Azure. The environment Tailspin Toys has looks like this. So they have authentication and gaming services running on VMs. Then they have databases for gaming, SQL Server 2008 R2. They also have databases for authentication services. So these don't actually need to be on that high level of performance, unlike the game's databases themselves. They're also making some use of some features like the service broker in SQL Server. On data warehousing, they are also using the same version of a SQL Server. They have plenty of reports they have written over time. And then, for reasons unknown, they also have a lot of developers and customer service people who are running ad hoc reports against their data warehouse. For loading data into warehouse, they're using integration services that run packages every hour. Current size of the data warehouse is around 20 terabytes, and it's growing around 250 gigabytes each month. So quarter of a terabyte each month. On reporting end, we have analysis services that feed reports from the cubes. We have reporting services reports, and finally, those reports are sent to SharePoint. The customer comes us with the need. So how they can migrate all of these gaming services into cloud really fast. They also want to move their data warehouse and the associated services around that. Naturally, they're cost conscious, but they also want to make use of some advanced security features to improve their database security and the security of their whole system in general. And of course, one of these goals is to improve also the gamer experience, because now that they have been having this growth, sometimes their games are not running as smoothly as they could. They also want to be protected against regional outages that can impact the single data center environments. So the solution starts with first the assessment, where we are doing some cost optimizations here. So the customer is making use of the Azure hybrid benefit, so they can take their own SQL Server licenses to Azure. As they have a PaaS environment, they actually get quite nice ratio for that. As for the VMs, they are prepaying for reserved capacity. This allows them to get that capacity in a little cheaper price by paying it forward for, I don't know, maybe was it 1 to 3 years or so. They're looking to migrate things fast, and they don't actually have a lot of database experience, so they're looking at the data migration service. As you saw it previously in the demo, that's quite easy to use, even if you're not highly skilled DBA. They're also using Azure Site Recovery. This allows them to basically take the VMs and lift and shift those into Azure. But they also want to do things properly from the start, so they're engaging one of the Microsoft partners, namely us in this case. The preferred solution will look like something like this on a high level. Of course, this is just one of the many viable options. However, as the customer is experiencing time constraint because of their fast growth of their business, this is usually the fastest way to do it. So you are lift and shifting gaming services as they are. You're moving databases with minimal need for changes. And that's why we are going with the managed instances. We have also the Azure Data Factory, which allows you to run SSIS packages as they are. We have a data warehouse running on Azure SQL database hyperscale. A little bit more about that in the coming slides. We also have hosted versions of Azure Analysis services. We are proposing the customer to rewrite some of the reports to Power BI. And those can be also, of course, shared with the SharePoint. Let's see now a bit more in the details. So what we have set up is the gaming service VMs. For the gaming and authentication databases, we selected managed instances. So we know that the authentication services don't require that much horsepower, and we are selecting the general purpose tier for that. The gaming service databases themselves are, of course, heavily utilized, so those need to go into the business critical tier. On the data warehousing side, we selected the SQL database. And on the reports, we had analysis services and the Power BI reports. So the managed instance, well, we already discussed the many benefits of this, and naturally the fact that you don't actually need to do a lot of changes. So this makes an excellent use case for the migration. It provides you with all the benefits you would still get from a fully managed Azure SQL database. But also it adds the capabilities that were previously available only in the SQL VMs. Managed instances also have something that allows you to build more secure networking. So it actually has native virtual network support, which is something the customer was also looking at. When it comes to the security, so we already have discussed this quite more in detail, but we can make use of the advanced data security. We have the layers of security coming from the Microsoft whole data security offering. We have ability to use things like transparent data encryption, dynamic data masking, and the row level security. So going from the network down to the customer data level, we have everything in place for that. And a little bit more on the networking solution. So the customer was looking to increase the level of security a bit. And something you can do in Azure VNets is to put it into smaller subnets, which allows you to control the access here. So in the game subnet, we have the VMs that are hosting the games. Then we have the authentication subnet, which is hosting those VMs that are used for the authentication services. And access to those happens through the gateway subnet. The managed instances are in their own subnet as well. And to manage those databases, you have a small management subnet where you have a Bastion host that you can use to then administer databases. Access from on-premises can happen either through a VPN gateway or maybe through express route. So a little bit about this data warehousing. I mentioned Azure signups before, but the reason we are actually leaning towards the Azure SQL database in a hyperscale is that they had the requirement to allow different users to access the data directly. So in signups, I think the limit these days is something like 128 concurrent queries and 1024 concurrent connections. So it's possible that once you have those developers and support staff who are querying your database ad hoc, that they could actually be starting to cause some contention there. The reason we're going with hyperscale is that it doesn't have the limitations, or at least it's not going to hit the limitations of the database anytime soon. It will also, when you are staying with SQL database, it will also provide you with the maximum compatibility for your data warehouse. So you don't need to start rewriting anything for Azure signups. All right. There's also a possibility to read scale out reporting queries. And this comes from the fact that they are using the business critical tier for their managed instance. Managed instance business critical tier is usually a 4-node cluster. It's using technology that is similar actually to availability groups, and it has an ability to provide you with a read-only endpoint, and you can basically use that functionality to scale out your reading for those secondary replicas, and you can then run those ad hoc reports without impacting your production workloads. Then we are also looking at the other services the customer have. So like we previously discussed, SQL Server is a platform on its own with ability to run packages, analysis services, and reports. So in this case, what we are suggesting to customers is that their integration packages would be migrated to the Azure Data Factory. So you actually get a really nice set of tools for migrating those. As we showed earlier, you can actually use the assessment tools to check that how those are compatible with your Azure SQL database. You can also just lift and shift those packages. So if you have a SQL Server data tools or SQL Server Management Studio, you can just take those packages and deploy directly from there to Azure Data Factory. Another alternative is, of course, if you don't want to use the data factory, is that you spin up a VM, which always comes with the integration services installed, and you will use that to host then your SSIS packages. For Azure, analysis services, we are proposing the use of Azure Analysis Services. So this is the fully PaaS version of the on-premise analysis services. From there, you could take tabular models and migrate those from on-premise to Azure using the Visual Studio. And again, the other alternative would be that you spin up that VM to run those packages. But in this case, I would probably go with the PaaS offering. The reporting services, of course, is a bit another story. So at the moment, there is no platform as a service alternative for reporting services. So you are either needing to use SQL Server VM, host reporting services there, or then you have to actually rewrite your reports to the Microsoft Power BI. And those are the options there. And then about the gaming services themselves. So this is, of course, more about database modernization, but honestly, I have never seen anyone move a database alone. So you will always take some number of services with you. What we have proposed here is that we are using Azure Site Recovery. This is a tool that's built in Azure, and you can use it to set up disaster recovery regions inside Azure. But it can also migrate virtual machines from on-premise to Azure. So this is something we do quite often as a part of a lift and shift migration. So we are deploying services, servers to multiple regions to making sure that we always have something close to the customer to minimize those network-related latencies. We are also using VM scale sets. This is something that allows you to automatically scale your environment based on the host and the inquest matrix. So when you're monitoring it, you can actually just automatically scale based on the workload. They also have capabilities to do automatic distribution of virtual machines across different availability zones. And for the high availability, here we are making use of availability zones. So in each Azure region, you will always find that it's made up of how many? I think it was like a three zones at minimum in each Azure region, and these are actually unique physical locations made up of one or more data centers. So in each region, you have a number of data centers, and those make up the availability zones. Availability zones for virtual machines like the gaming VMs we are now migrating will provide up to 99.99% of uptime SLA. I think that's actually quite high. I'm not sure if anyone is providing better for VMs at the moment. And then the customer also had this kind of desire to be protected against regional outages. So what if the whole region goes down? And we do have solutions for that as well. So from the database side, we can geo-restore and geo-replicate the data warehousing database. Also with SQL Server managed instances, we now these days have the auto failover groups. And basically what that allows is that if the region goes down, we can detect that and automatically fail over to a completely different region of Azure. You could also have that for the data warehousing. However, since it's usually not that business critical, it tends to be fine if you have a manual process for failing over your data warehouses. But it would also be supported if that's something you are looking for. Now, having built this kind of an architecture, we can then start moving to the migration. And as we already looked at the process before, this would be very, very similar. we would do the discovery and assessment of the database and other assets there. If need to be, we would do some schema fixing conversions in case of need. And then we would migrate. So we would use the toolings we have now shown. Also, what we have discussed here, we would migrate schema, data, VMs, and during the cutover, we would move all the operations into Azure. In the post-migration phase, we are then doing iteration after iteration of the optimizations, testing, remediating possible issues. And this would eventually lead to a satisfied customer. All right, so this exercise is about over. Is there any questions regarding why we did some of those selections or anything like that you would like to ask? Okay.
I think it was very well covered, Mika. Yeah. From the rationale and the benefits, both organizationally and financially.
Yeah. I even touched topics that aren't actually my expertise, like the VMs. I know how to do those things, but my expertise is really around the database stuff.
It was really good. Well, what would you say about in general the kind of the smoothness of the overall migration projects, be them lift and shift, or in entire data state modernization?
Okay, so I usually find it that when you prepare it well, it goes well. And this is why I also mentioned that one of the reasons to go to your partner is not because that they will do heavy lifting for you, that they will also help you set up the governance models and things like that. They also know how to use the tools. Personally, I don't remember actually being in a migration case where we would have run into a lot of obstacles. Most of the cases I have seen, they have been quite quite smooth in general, but this is because we spend a lot of time practicing and working together closely with the customer to make sure that everything is set up properly for them. And one of the key things I think is to really include those key stakeholders early on, get them into it. And there's a lot of, there can be quite a few confusing things, but I've seen that when you sit down and discuss, there's usually quite clear path forward.
Exactly. And what about, apart from pure cost savings, which are substantial, what about the aspect of increased productivity, because there's less kind of mundane housekeeping to be done?
Yeah. So yeah, that's actually a good point. So there's a few different things there I would like to mention. So one is that, like I mentioned, DBAs do a lot of things that aren't usually contributing to your business directly. And they really love it when they can start working with the business. Of course, also a very good first step in any migration is that I don't mind doing the lift and shift migrations, because once you are in Azure, then that modernization is so much easier to do. So even if you just take a VM as it is, put it in Azure, it might seem that, okay, this isn't helping us that much. But when you start looking at the bigger picture and the long-term goals, you have then access to so much great technology that you start implementing on your environments and getting those benefits. So yeah, I think it's it's a wonderful opportunity to optimize not just the time what you're doing, but how well you are doing the whole long journey.
That's exactly what I've seen in projects, is that the freeing up of resources to kind of do what their day job should be produces enormous potential. But having said that, there needs to be, as you mentioned earlier, there needs to be stakeholder buy-in and stakeholder understanding, and this kind of cultural change is a key part of projects. It needs to be managed not just from a technical or benefits perspective, but also from a communications perspective. And then everybody involved needs to be aware that now there's this potential for an open dialogue about what the data can be doing for me and what the data can be doing.
Yeah, that's true.
And in fact, in a later session, we're going to be talking about precisely that. So, once you're in a situation where your data estate and data assets have been migrated and modernized, then they're open to be used by an entire swathe of fantastic services, such as Azure Synapse, which is effectively a kind of a single port of call to expose yourself to all of the analytic services available within Azure. So this.
Yeah, I mean, the whole database modernization, that's like a really, really good first step on the whole data estate modernization journey. Even if it's just, like I mentioned, just moving those servers into a cloud. That's really, really the first step you need to take.
Precisely, yeah. But then, as you said at the very start, you need to also take people on that journey, not just knowledge. So it is migrating people and their expectations.
Yes, that's true.
But yeah, I have to say that given the technical difficulties we had at the start, you actually plowed through this presentation beautifully. So
yeah, that was quite the rocky start, I have to say. But hey, actually,
I'm getting more gray hairs because of that. So.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, but hey, we are actually getting quite close to finishing up. So we had actually set aside some time for discussion. Unfortunately, we are a bit overshooting that. However, if anyone wants to stay online and chat after we've finished, I don't actually need to be anywhere. Unfortunately, Cormac, I think you have the other session starting right away, but I can stay online, answer any questions, discuss around this topic. However, before we are wrapping up, there are a few resources I would like to point you to. So first of all, Microsoft does have also hands-on labs that you can try yourself. So if you go and search for the workshop SQL Ground to Cloud, this is one of them. I have done this myself in a few occasions. They are actually quite nice, and they actually now run pretty well. So there's a lot of effort put into these workshops. So if you want to try some of the technical stuff out yourself, go and do that one. All right, now this presentation broke again. So I'm trying to get to the final slide. All right, so everyone, thank you for joining us, staying with us despite the little bit of the technical difficulties at the start. If you are interested in learning more about our data estate modernization stories, visit us at this link. I will also put it in the chat after I'm closing up this presentation, so you can click it directly there.
But Mika, before you close the presentation, I'd like to say to the attendees,
yes.
I really appreciate your attention and attendance at the presentation. And once again, I apologize for the technical difficulties we had at the start. Normally, this presentation would be delivered in.
Okay, now we lost audio again. What Cormac was saying is that we usually deliver this kind of a workshop session as a classroom ones. So this was also a bit different.
What I would like to say, is my audio still working?
Now it is. You just lost
okay,
you for a moment.
I tell you what, Mika, if you raise your hand if you lose my audio.
I will, I will.
Okay, so In case you missed the introductions at the start, my name is Cormac Walsh, and I'm from Advisory, which is the consultancy division of Northcloud. And my responsibility area in Advisory is leading the data practice and I like to say the aggressive and profitable use of data. And Mika, would you like to revisit your introduction?
Yes. So you already know the name. Role for me is the database reliability engineering practice and team lead. And we help our customers working with databases, and that also includes the database modernization journey.
Okay. So once again, thank you. And
also thank you.
Yes. So signing off.
Yep. All right. Anyone on the line, do you have any questions you'd like to ask? I think this at least is a good time for it.
Everybody should be unmuted now if they would like to.
I was just seeing. All right. I guess there were also no questions on the chat. I'm checking quickly.
Mika, if I can just say that you're a champion. Thanks for that. It was a wonderful.
Thank you. It was
you did.
nice working with you.
Yeah, it was honestly, you're super smooth, and it was a pleasure to listen to. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. I think we can wrap this up then. And I hope you have better luck with your next presentation.
Yep. Me too.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.